You know, the world's most exciting stories are found in your Bible. And here to talk with us about some of the most amazing stories that the Bible has to offer is filmmaker Tim Mahoney. Tim, great to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be here, Gary.
Now, Tim flew down from Minnesota, and as we're making this, it's January. It's cold in Minnesota. He's wearing a scarf.
I've got my scarf that, a lot of Minnesotans have scarves, so I felt comfortable wearing it today.
And I thought, just to be in character, he should wear his scarf. But you are an adventurer. You are a filmmaker. You have made a number of different films. In fact, you have filmed recently a film that I've seen in preview form that is just, I don't know how to say it. It's one of the most exciting, challenging. If you have a bag of popcorn, you're just going to be eating popcorn like this. It's a very, very good film, and let's talk about that a moment.
Well, this film is Patterns of Evidence, The Red Sea Miracle, and it's probably the biggest production that I've ever done. It's a two-part film. So the first part of this film investigates the route of the Exodus to the sea crossing. That's why it's called The Red Sea Miracle. Mm-hmm. And we are looking at two different viewpoints that have developed now. One I call the Egyptian approach, and the other one the Hebrew approach, as to where the sea crossing took place. And I told you it was a big film. It's actually going to be in theaters February 18th, part 1, and part 2 will be May 5th. And this is really one of the biggest investigations I've been working on for 20 years. And wow. We've got information, as you know, on Patterns of Evidence films. We've got lots of different scholars and different viewpoints. And I think that there's probably never been a big of an investigation in this biblical story as the Red Sea Miracle.
Now, when Tim makes a film, he makes a film. He makes a film that you really want to stop and watch. Don't go in saying, well, I'm going to see if I like this. You're going to like it because he has a gift. And by the way, let's just take a little preview look right now.
For almost 20 years, I've been searching for evidence of one of the greatest miracles of the entire Bible, the miraculous parting of the Red Sea.
Tim, the first question most people ask is, where's Mount Sinai? My first question as a geographer is, where was the sea that was parted and crossed?
So what do you think the crossing site, where would that be?
Well, for once, I'm going to follow the conventional argument here.
When I look at the Exodus story through the eyes of a scientist, then it contains a lot of observations which just make sense to modern science.
I think it is possible to demonstrate that it took place in close proximity to Egypt.
I know that some people would say, well, there were probably 5,000, maybe 20,000 Israelites.
This matter of large numbers is a very, very thorny issue.
There has to be enough Israelites in order to make Pharaoh and the rest of Egypt scared.
Whether the 10 plagues happened is a miracle. Whether the Red Sea parted is a miracle. Archaeology cannot prove or disprove a miracle.
Make the sea small, put it close to Egypt, all of a sudden it calls into question the biblical text itself.
And you cast their pursuers into the depths as a stone into mighty waters.
Where were these ancient lakes and what is now all desert?
And what sort of people could stand the strength of the wind that would part that depth of water? Nobody could stand and walk that land bridge in that sort of wind. It would be impossible.
Why is it important to think about these things?
At the end of the day, we're really talking about a miraculous event of unprecedented proportion, of God's miraculous saving power.
The Red Sea Miracle is a 2-part film series Fathom event, February 18th and May 5th.
How about that? That, in my opinion, is filmmaking. And not only filmmaking, but it comes from the best source to be found in the entire world, the source that we love to read.
Mm-hmm. Well, 20 years ago when I started this approach, looking for patterns of evidence, I actually had a crisis of faith. I had no idea in the beginning that when I would go look for the stories of the Bible, that people would start to wear me down by saying, well, we don't have any evidence for the Israelites in Egypt. And why would you look for the route of the Exodus when we know that these things didn't happen? And that first investigation, I was sitting in an edit suite when I looked at this, and this profound thought came to my mind. In fact, a chill came into the room, Gary, and it said, everything your family has believed, that your mother believes, that you believe about the Bible, is a lie. Because I was watching this interview with someone saying that there's no evidence for this.
Yeah.
And at that moment, another voice came into my thoughts and said, stop editing, get up, go to your office. And I walked down the hall, went to my office, go to the bookcase, and read that book. It was like a book was sitting there, and I pulled it out, and this book had evidence that I was looking at. I was looking at in the edit suite at one scholar saying one thing, and then in this book, I was, in a sense, providentially led to this investigation that was being conducted that answered those questions about that, and that became Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus, the first film that I worked on.
Yeah, and reading right up here across the top, it says, you never know where a crisis of faith will lead you. And what a statement that is. I think a lot of people have had crises of faith in their lives, and is this stuff really real or not? And where do I fit into it? And what should I believe about it? And you watch something on TV, you pick up a newspaper, whatever, and somebody makes some agnostic statement, and science has now proved this. And you go away saying, what am I supposed to believe?
Right, exactly. I was raised in a Christian home. We read the Bible, growing up, and I really didn't have any problems believing that the events of the Bible happened. But it wasn't until I got older, when I went on this investigation, that it started to wear on me, and people started raising questions, and they were saying, well, there's just no evidence. And I thought, well, if this person who's there in Egypt digging was telling me that there's no evidence, well, then maybe they know something I don't know. And that's where that crisis of faith started. I want to tell you something exciting. This new movie, The Red Sea Miracle, the very man who caused a crisis of faith for me 20 years ago is in this next film. And I'm going to give you just a little sneak peek about this, because what happened is that I heard that he had new evidence of the Israelites in Egypt. And we're going to be revealing that evidence. It's just really, really powerful. But Dr. Manfred Bitek wanted to be interviewed to tell me about this new evidence. So here, I sat down with him. I said, the first time we met, I said, I went to your dig site, and I told him what happened and that I had a crisis of faith. And so when I asked him, so what have you found? And he starts to tell me about evidence for the Israelites in Egypt that shouldn't be there, but it is there. And so he's telling us that we shouldn't doubt the Bible. In our films, Patterns of Evidence, there's always a sequence of events that we look for. In this one, there's again a pattern. We're looking for the departure of the Israelites from Egypt. We're looking for a direction that they would be going, a desert that they would be crossing, a detour to a dead end that they would take, a deep sea that they would cross, and a destination to Mount Sinai, where Moses had met God at a burning bush. And so that's this next pattern that we're looking at. And this pattern was so big that that's why it's taken 2 films, the February 18th showing, which is going to be in theaters all across the nation. In fact, if people want to get tickets, they can go to patternsofevidence.com. Patternsofevidence.com, and they'll see the trailer, and they can get a ticket. But this is a one-night only event. And as I said, this is probably one of the biggest biblical investigations on the Exodus that's ever been conducted. It's taken me 20 years of research to get here.
And the thing I love about Tim's work is that I've noticed over the years of my own personal Bible study and my own personal journey as I've grown in faith over the years has been set back from time to time by academia. You pick up a journal or you pick up a very heavy book that's been written by some academic, and usually they try to weed the miracles out of the Bible. They try to make the Bible read so that a 20th century intellect will accept it. And 20th century intellect, 21st century intellect says miracles are just fictional tales that were written in the old days to make people faithful or to make them come to you and believe what you say. In other words, they were inventions. But from my perspective, a miracle is a miracle is a miracle. And the biggest one in the Bible is when Moses stood up and parted the waters.
Well, by the way, miracles are still happening today. And in part 2, we towards the end of it, we start talking about miracles in part 1, but we're really going to cover miracles and do they happen today and what is a miracle. The question then is how does God work in a miracle? Is it something just happens in nature? So when I talked about there's two different ways that people look at the story of the Exodus. One is what I call an Egyptian approach, and the other one I call a Hebrew approach. So an Egyptian approach looks at the miracle of the Red Sea and sees the story of the Exodus happening near Egypt, at a Sea of Reeds, for example, at a shallow, marshy lake, where the miracle is in the timing of the wind, that the wind blew at just the right time that parted water, but it can't be very deep. From a naturalistic standpoint,
Sure.
It can only be about 3 feet to, let's say, 6, 7 feet deep. Whereas a Hebrew approach starts looking at the story from what Moses had recorded and what had been written in scriptures, that it was a deep and mighty sea, and that the water was parted, and Moses tells us that the water became like walls of water. And Cecil B. DeMille, as we remember, he made the Ten Commandments twice, and I raised the question. I actually went and visited his family and have gotten to know them, and we look at those scenes from Cecil B. DeMille, as we all remember it, and we see walls of water and the Israelites walking through it. Now that's a spectacular miracle, or a more simple naturalistic miracle in the timing of the wind. So that's what this film, The Red Sea Miracle, is going to look like. Look at it.
Yeah.
It's those two different approaches.
And thinking back about Cecil B. DeMille and his entire view of the Exodus experience, and actually it's more than that. It's the life of Moses, and it's the Passover, and it's everything that drives the Old Testament. And you think back, and I don't know when he filmed that, but some of the effects in his movies they look like they were computer aided, CG material. And there were no computers back in his day.
Right.
How did he do that?
Well, he created, I think, techniques where they were, cutting edge at the time. It was in the 1950s that he made that second film. But as we know, this is Prophecy Watchers program. The thing that's interesting that I didn't realize, I was working on the story of the Exodus, is that the plagues of the Exodus and the events of the Exodus, in some ways, many people believe will repeat themselves in the future. And in the book of Revelations, the plagues of the Exodus are repeated. And so there are connections to this story. The films that I make are films of remembrance, but I also believe that they're films of forewarning. And I think that people have lost touch sometimes. Young people today have lost touch with the Old Testament. They only read the New Testament. But I've always found that the Old Testament is absolutely fascinating, and that I think there are very important things for us to know, because they're going to repeat. Have you heard the line, history repeats itself?
Oh, yeah.
So.
And does it ever? That's what the Bible is about. Because, you have two witnesses in Revelation at a time of great calamity, which resembles the calamity during the life of Moses. And the two witnesses work great miracles. And many people say that one of the two witnesses, Moses himself, returned. And that's debatable. People debate it all the time. I happen to believe one of the two witnesses is Moses. But that's another story. The fact is that we need to believe the Bible at the heart level. The heart accepts things by faith and doesn't try to filter them through a technological filter that filters out all miracles, which is basically the way people look at the Bible today.
Yes. Well, this question of miracle, we're trying to figure out, well, what do you call this next film? The Red Sea parting, the Red Sea, crossing.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, no, it's the Red Sea miracle. And that's the big question. As we said, it's probably one of the biggest miracles in the Bible. The resurrection is enormous and very significant. But there's spiritual connections between the Israelites passing through the sea.
Right.
And there's more that's coming out with these films. I don't feel like I'm making these films of my own accord. I mean, I'm a participant in it. I'm the director. I have a team, and we're working on it. These films are retelling, and we've got lots of recreations, as you saw in this film.
Yeah.
We've got things that people have never seen before. One of the most touching scenes is the scene of Joseph's bones being taken out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
That's been very close to my heart because in our other films we've talked about Joseph.
Yes.
And in the second film, The Moses Controversy, that's about the writing of the Bible and the alphabet coming. These films are very, very powerful understandings of what I think why it was important for Moses to be able to write and to give an eyewitness account.
And by the way, under the rubric of patterns of evidence, Tim does his work. And I have to say, I'm kind of a connoisseur of good motion pictures. And by the way, they're getting harder and harder to find these days. But a good motion picture has a lot of things in it. It has a good script, good dialogue, good acting, good deliverance, good lighting, good locations. But the thing that it has to have is a good filmmaker. It has to have a good cinematographer. And you're looking at one right here, right now. I praise his work all the time. You've got the gift, whatever it is. I don't know what it's called. But to put together a film that you just can't look away from, you've got that gift. And I really appreciate that.
Well, this event coming up on February 18th is going to be an experience because our team has worked really hard. We actually are making films that are changing people's lives in one viewing. It's important if you have family or friends or relatives or a Sunday school group or your church, and you can look at, if you want to take them to a Bible-affirming, inspirational evening, this is going to be it, because this whole event is about 2.5 hours. We actually, the first half of the film takes you on the journey, then we have an intermission, so that people can get up and do whatever they need to do, get some more popcorn, or go use the restroom, and then the film comes back. But at the end of the film, which is very inspiring, it's part one, we have a panel discussion, and we're going to be filming it at the Ark Encounter, and Ken Ham is going to be on the panel. Todd Starnes is the narrator, is the host, I should say, and Kay Arthur is also going to be on there. Janet Medford and Professor Jeremy Lyon. So that panel is going to be discussing what we've seen. And our films, at the end of them, people are like, boy, that was a lot to think about. And this helps us to sort of walk through what they've just seen.
Super. Let's go back to Patterns of Evidence, one of your earlier productions, and the Moses controversy, because I didn't want to get past that, because the thing that I enjoy about the Moses controversy is that it deals with the man, Moses, and his life, and it focuses specifically down to one question: could Moses write? Was Moses able to take a piece of papyrus and some kind of a writing stick that maybe had ink on it and so forth, and was he able to write? Well, of course, from my perspective, but I'm really shocked. You go back and the Moses controversy starts with the idea of, no, Moses couldn't write.
Well, that's what the scholars are saying. Yeah.
That's what the scholars are saying. So Tim, being Tim Mahoney, says, you know what, I'm going to tackle that question. Could Moses write? And what a job you did.
Well, the thing that's unusual about this is that there's things called higher criticism, that they've attacked the fact that Moses wasn't the author of the first 5 books of the Bible.
Yeah.
So the question is well, what are some of the reasons? Well, that he couldn't write, and the Israelites couldn't read. But what do we find in that investigation is the first film, the Exodus, shows this area of Avaris, where right next to Ramesses in Egypt in the Nile Delta. It shows that location, and what we find out is that the very earliest form of the alphabet, somebody took Egyptian hieroglyphs, for example, the bowls symbol, and that was an aleph, and it eventually becomes the letter A.
Right.
So they took these symbols, 22 I believe it is,
Yes.
and they modified them into an early form of the alphabet. And then that alphabet is not done by intelligent people. It's done by slaves, by common people. They're scratching these symbols, and we start to realize that here we have people that aren't the Egyptians, but are a Semitic people that are using this writing system. So what it tells us then is that this alphabet migrates, just like the Israelites, out of Egypt into the Promised Land. Later on, the Phoenicians use it. So when someone says, well, the Phoenicians invented the alphabet, this film actually shows that that's probably not the case. I believe that this alphabet, and others, is an early form of Hebrew. Why is that important? It's that it says, in order for us to know God's Word, you'd have to know how to read the Word.
Sure.
The reason why this is important is it says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and dwelt among us.
And dwelt among us.
Yes. And so as we look at those verses, we're starting to understand something different. And we start to see that it's, in order for us to know the Word of God, you'd have to know how to read. And what we're saying is, Moses then, I realize if he's writing an eyewitness account, he would have to have an ability to write it. But it says then to the Israelites were to write these commands on their doorposts and teach them to their children. The Moses controversy shows that was possible. So the very commands the archaeology that I would say that's left behind is the fact that the Bible says that Moses could write, that he did write, and the Israelites were supposed to read it and write on their doorposts, and guess what we find? We find that happened. The world's first alphabet happens at that time. It comes at that time, and guess what? That's the basis of all the alphabets in the entire world. And you know what else? No other book in the world has utilized that alphabet more than the Bible.
And Jesus in the New Testament makes the statement, and I won't quote it directly, but I'm paraphrasing. Jesus said, when Moses wrote about me, he wrote such and such and so and so. And Jesus made the flat statement that Moses could write. Modern academia says, no, the alphabet came much, 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 much later. And this is what the Moses controversy is all about. And you say, well, that kind of sounds like a little dry subject to me. I don't know whether I'd be interested in that or not. It's not dry. This is really an exciting story, made much more so by great filmmaking.
Well, and I was trying to remember, sometimes as I'm getting older, I just want to go back. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. The thing about the issue of reading and the ability, that was so profound to me, was that I realized that what if the gift of the alphabet wasn't just a coincidence, but that it was actually a divine inspiration. Hieroglyphs and other forms of writing were actually held by the elite, and so simple people wouldn't know those things. It was hidden from them. This alphabet comes along, and it made it available to everyone. And that's why I think...
And that available to everyone is really important, because Pharaonic writing, back in the days of Egypt, was really difficult. It had case forms and tenses and difficulties, and it was hard to actually write the symbols. They're very complex symbols. So it's not a language for the common man. It was a priesthood that wrote those symbols, whereas the alphabet, 22 letters, the common man can write that and read it.
And so in my work on patterns of evidence, what I started to see is that there were patterns that were there that we could look that would match the biblical text. And so that's what I've done with these films. The very first one, I started out working on the Red Sea miracle literally almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
But I was told that why search for the route of the Exodus if there's no evidence that they lived in Egypt? So I went back and took 12 years to work on patterns of evidence, the Exodus. Then I knew we had to do the Moses controversy because he said, well, we can't trust that Moses wrote any of this. And so now here we are, and we've got on February 18th, this national release of Patterns of Evidence, the Red Sea Miracle. And if people want to get tickets, they can go to patternsofevidence.com, patternsofevidence.com, and they can get tickets. And I encourage people, to bring your family, bring your friends, bring your small group, bring your church along. And we have resources that they can get from our website.
And come expecting to watch an adventure, because the way Tim puts things together, they are an adventure. They pull you along, and it's just great filmmaking. I can't say that too often. By the way, I have here a couple of DVDs, the Moses Controversy and Patterns of Evidence. And in that Patterns of Evidence, Tim deals with the question of timing. When did these things happen that you read about in the Bible? A lot of academics say, well, things happened over here instead of way back there, and they argue and they write their books and so forth. Tim comes along with an entirely different method, finding a pattern. And you won't believe what he found, but you need to see it. Also, I've got another couple of DVD sets here. Biblical Archaeology Comes Alive. Randall Price, Tim Mahoney, Aaron Lipkin, Michael Lake, and your contribution to biblical archaeology is?
Well, the Exodus, uncovering the Exodus.
And which has come to be your specialty, by the way. And then I've got Biblical Archaeology Comes Alive, Volume 1, Randall Price, Aaron Lipkin, Michael Lake, Timothy Alberino, and Tim Mahoney. I mean, some really good viewing. And I've got these 4 DVDs I'd like to offer you. Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. But I'm telling you what, for your gift of $75, there is so much here in the way of education, enjoyment. Watch these things as a family, and I guarantee you it'll pull you closer together than you ever thought you could get. Some really great topic of conversation. And for your gift of $75, free shipping anywhere in the U.S., you just go to prophecywatchers.tv, scroll down the online library, you'll find the biblical archaeological package, these 4 DVDs for your gift of $75. Tim Mahoney, the time has run out, but I so much appreciate you coming by.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we must talk again. I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, we're watching. You be watching too.
Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.